All right, I want to thank everybody for joining us at this very special community meeting. This is part of the People's Budget Movement with Councilmember Shama Sawan. We're here live at the North Lake Tiny Homes Village, Tiny House Village, and it's a special People's Budget community meeting. The City Council will be discussing and then potentially voting on critical budget amendments that Councilmember Shama Sawan going to be putting forward on Stop the Sweeps legislation. We'll also be putting forward a proviso that prohibits the city of Seattle from spending any money on sweeping the North Lake Tiny House Villages. Very soon, we're going to be hearing from Councilmember Shama Sawan on the details of that. But again, I wanted to thank people for joining us. And at the risk of it being a little bit awkward, I wanted to also just show people the context where I'm at right now at this tiny house village. We're live from North Lake. I want to show the homes. We'll very soon be hearing from community members, but just to get a sense of the community that the city would be sweeping if they were to follow through on their continuous threats to sweep the tiny house village here at North Lake. Hopefully you can get a sense right here. We'll be hearing from community members on site very shortly. And of course, as part of this People's Budget Movement, the main demand to defund the Seattle Police Department by at least 50%. Later on in the agenda, after we hear from North Lake community members, we'll be hearing about the specifics of those cuts to the police that could then be invested to the tune of $85 million in Black and brown communities. So again, thank you for joining us. We're going to go ahead and start as we always do. This is a community meeting so that people can pressure City Council in a little under an hour. Most people hopefully have already signed up for public comment, which opened up at 8 a.m. But let's hear from Nick Jones, a community organizer in Councilmember Shama Sawan's office. For a few minutes, he's going to teach all the people who have not yet signed up how to sign up. And it is important, the more people who sign up to advocate, to stop the sweep, to no sweep on the North Lake Tiny House Villages, for defunding the police, the better. So Nick, go ahead and take it from here, please.
All right, thank you, Adam. Yeah, my name is Nick Jones, community organizer in Shama Sawan's office. All right, definitely everyone should sign up for public comment if you haven't already. You know, every name that we add to the public comment list puts that much more pressure on City Council, as Adam was saying. And to sign up, you're going to want to get to this webpage. Folks are probably a little familiar with this by now, but just to run through it, the easiest way to get there is in whatever your search bar is. I would just type in public comment Seattle or Seattle public comment. Should either way pop up as the first thing here. This .gov URL, just click that. And it will take you to this form. You just scroll down and this form should be live. You're just going to want to fill this out in its entirety. And really crucially, make sure you fill in your correct email and phone number. Whatever email you put in here, they'll send the link to join the Zoom call where you'll give public comment. And then in that call, they'll use whatever phone number you enter here to identify you. So definitely fill this out, whole thing. And at the end, you know, you can just check this for agenda you're addressing. Feel free to put in that everyone want to speak to, you know, stop the sweeps, or defund SPD, or the people's budget, you know, anything like that. And then just hit submit, and then you should get a link to your email. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So definitely do that right now, and I'll kick it back over to Adam.
All right, thank you so much, Nick, for providing that instruction. We want to have a good amount of time to hear from the community members here at North Lake. As I was mentioning, we're going to hear from Anitra Freeman, who's a longtime activist for self-managed encampments. We're going to hear from Hannah Lake and also Dan McGraw. But first, let's hear from Councilmember Shama Sawan about the legislation that council members will have the opportunity most likely to vote on today to stop the sweeps and also to make sure that North Lake does not get swept. So Councilmember Shama, please go ahead and take it from here.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And it's so exciting to see our neighbors at Nicholsville North Lake. And I'm glad, Adam, that you are broadcasting this from live from the North Lake Nicholsville Tiny House Village. Welcome to everybody who is at the village and is on the community meeting right now, which is a very important discussion. And I just wanted to remind everyone, these community meetings that we've been organizing as sort of a preface to the committee meetings of the City Council have provided a really important platform for all of us, ordinary people, working people, activists, organizers, to come together and understand what forces are stacked up against us and why we need to seriously get organized. And in fact, in fact, Nicholsville activists have for years, in fact, going back to 2007, have been among those who've been really fighting on the ground for the rights of homeless people, for improving services for those of us who face the devastating problem of homelessness. And that's now increasingly large numbers of people because of the skyrocketing rent and the epidemic of evictions, and also have been advocating for affordable housing. So today it is very important, of all days, it's always important, but today it is especially important that we stand with our Nicholsville neighbors to demand that the City Council reject Mayor Durkin's latest of her many attempts to evict Nicholsville North Lake Tiny House Village. And we have to point out, aside from all the arguments we can make about the statistics, about humanity, about how awful it would be to evict tiny house villages at any moment, at any time, but especially to point out how dramatically arrogant and ill-advised and out of touch Mayor Durkin is to be attempting an eviction in the middle of this pandemic, at a moment when even the Centers for Disease Control have clarified that evicting homeless people from whatever space they might have is actually going to endanger them, and it's going to exacerbate the public health crisis. And let's not forget that we are in the middle not only of a pandemic, but in the middle of a moment when the rates of COVID-19 infections are going up in Washington state and nationwide. There seems to be a recent spike in death rate. We are not out of the danger in any way whatsoever. In fact, we have to stand together as working class people, as those of us fighting for a better world, against policies that will make things worse for us during this pandemic, not to mention the latest economic projections that are not surprising, but really dire. So we have to fight against any attempt to thrust the burden of this crisis, whether it's the pandemic or the economic crisis of capitalism, on the shoulders of those who are already the most vulnerable. So today it is important to tell City Council, no evicting North Lake Tiny House Village, stand with Nicholsville, and tell City Council to support the proviso from my office and from the People's Budget Movement to make sure that our North Lake neighbors are protected. I also wanted to report on a new poll that has just come out that shows that over half of those surveyed in Seattle now are supporting the proposal to defund the Seattle Police Department by 50%. This is a huge testament to the George Floyd uprising nationwide and the solidarity that we have among working class people to addressing police violence, to bringing about police accountability. And we know defunding Seattle Police Department by at least 50% is going to be, if we win it, a big step in the direction of police accountability. It will not be enough. We will also need to fight for an elected community oversight board with full powers over the police, including hiring and firing powers. But the defunding is the first step in the direction of police accountability, and we need to win this today. And as I've said before, it is a sign of the strength of the movement that 7 of the 9 council members have made public promises for 50% defunding of the police department, but still there's no concrete proposal. And many of you may know, yesterday, my office and the People's Budget Movement, Socialist Alternative, Nicholsville, many of the organizations that have been involved with us, UAW 4121, the union that represents graduate students at the University of Washington campus, we've proposed $85 million at least to be cut from the Seattle Police Department's budget this year, in this year's budget, that is the budget for August to December. That is going to be the best way to also hold the city establishment accountable to carry out defunding next year. So what are we proposing we do with this $85 million? We are proposing that the largest portion of it go to affordable housing, over $35 million for affordable housing. And that is important because, as our homeless neighbors themselves will tell us, we need to protect tiny house villages. We need to build more tiny house villages. But we also know that in addition to making sure that our homeless neighbors are protected today, they also need affordable housing. And in fact, depending on the private for-profit housing market does not provide affordability. Housing has become less affordable in the middle of this for-profit construction boom. That's why we need both rent control and a massive expansion of social housing, that is publicly owned affordable housing. We already won a historic victory of the Amazon tax, through which affordable housing is going to be funded. And we won an additional historic victory, which is the dedication of at least $18 million annually of the Amazon tax revenues for specifically Black working class affordable housing in the Central District. But that is not going to be enough. So that's why we are demanding that the Seattle Police Department be defunded to at least the tune of $85 million this year right away, and $35 million be dedicated for affordable housing, especially for our working class community members who are facing gentrification and displacement. So that means our Black and brown community members, absolutely. So in addition to that, we are also demanding that the so-called navigation team, which is a euphemism for carrying out inhumane sweeps of our homeless neighbors, we are saying, and the navigation team disband that once and for all, because the sweeps are not working. In addition, the city establishment is wasting millions of dollars every year in inflicting this inhumanity on our homeless community members. And I'm happy to report that the Seattle King County Coalition on Homelessness is strongly supporting the proposal to end the navigation team. So let's make sure we win this as well. And we are, of course, joining with community organizations throughout the city who are demanding that specific funds be allocated from the defunding towards community-based organizations, including tried and tested solutions that are alternatives to police-based public safety. So we are in strong support of all the organizations that are putting those proposals forward. And in the overall proposal that the People's Budget has put forward, we are funding all of that. Now, of course, the question is, can we win it? We need to build a strong movement. That's why this community meeting is important. Jonathan, later on in this community meeting, will go over more details of the proposal, but I'll stop there, and I'm eager to hear from everybody who's going to present today.
Okay, thank you so much, Shama. So yeah, let's go ahead now and hear from some of the activists here and the residents here at Nicholsville who have really, to be honest, from day one of the People's Budget movement, have played a huge role in helping advocate for the rights of homeless people and winning first-time funding for encampments. That was actually through the People's Budget movement in 2014. And actually, our speaker right now, Anitra Freeman, has an even longer history. A lot of you have probably seen on Twitter, on Facebook, an image that Councilmember Sawant has been sharing around, which hopefully we can share on the live stream right now. This is actually a photo from Nicholsville, the very first start 11 years ago when it began. And actually, if we're able to put up this photo, Anitra Freeman was actually arrested that day as an activist. We'll be able to show the photo in a little bit, but oh, here we see it now. That's great. But let's go ahead right now and let's hear Anitra Freeman, who I believe was not herself able to connect up, but is on Scott Morrow's phone. So if Anitra, you could go ahead and take it from here, please.
Good morning, or yes, it's morning. Hi, I'm Anitra Freeman. Nicholsville began as a sea of pink tents out on West Marginal Way. And the city was not excited about our dream. Our dream was to have an eco village of 1,000 tiny houses to keep people safe who were forced to sleep outside. And instead of helping with that, the city came in and swept us. I was the first person arrested that day. Nickelodeons persisted. It's a self-managed group. I stepped back. I've got my own projects with Share and Wheel. Nickelodeons took over and they persisted. And over the years, they have built real tiny houses and gardens and kitchens and all sorts of things for, shower trailers, all sorts of facilities for homeless people. They've built community. They've built strength. This is what homeless people can do for themselves, and Seattle should be proud of it. But the mayor and the Human Services Department wants to destroy it. They want a corporate group, Lehigh, to run all tiny house villages. Well, Lehigh wouldn't be at all interested in running tiny house villages if the Nickelodeons hadn't proven them to be successful, to be such a great idea. The Nickelodeons should be rewarded for that. To also share began with tents outside of the kingdom, and now is 11 indoor shelters plus 2 tent cities. Wheel began with a few people getting up on a platform and speaking outside of Noel House. And now Wheel has the Women in Black Project, but also our own low barrier shelter. Homeless people organizing, grassroots democratic organizing is powerful. Get behind it, join us, support us, and we will change the world. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Anitra, for those really inspiring words. I just want to note one thing also that's really impactful. We're here at the Tiny House North Lake Village. We're doing social distance community meeting right now. One of the things that I was just informed is that at this North Lake Tiny House Villages, there's not been a single, not one case of COVID-19. And that's not just a coincidence. That's because we have an organized community here who has been consciously making sure that the safety and the health of their residents, of themselves, their own community, come first. And that's in the process where, as we all know, COVID-19 is ravaging the most vulnerable among us, especially Black and Brown communities, but also especially the homeless community. But here at North Lake Tiny Villages, we've not seen a single case. And not only that, but my understanding is that very soon they're going to try and implement a monthly voluntary testing program to ensure that it stays like that. It's really incredible the way that the worst impacts of our free market housing, which we know does not provide basic housing for ordinary people, can be mitigated with even a localized, self-managed, authorized encampment like the North Lake Tiny House Village. Let's go ahead and hear from another resident of Nicholsville. If you were with us at the Wednesday community meeting, you had a chance to hear from Hannah Lake, who is a Nicholsville resident. And let's hear about, so let's go ahead and take it from here, Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to say tiny house villages for the homeless are being widely accepted by Seattleites. However, our village is being threatened eviction by Mayor Durkin and the Human Services Department. We have a very beautiful and very successful village here at North Lake. We are self-managed, and that gives us a lot of dignity. We have responsibilities that get us ready for work, and my life has literally been saved by this place. And we've been fighting over this with the city for over a year now. Jason Johnson has been threatening us that we had to leave, and Deputy Mayor Sixkiller promised us that he would help us find somewhere to go, but he has not kept that promise. And it's so beautiful here that it's just such a shame. Like, it's terrible. And we have such a strong community here of people that are fighting to keep their place to live and fighting to stay self-managed. We're the only type of village in the city that is self-managed. There are other villages that have different people in charge, and we need a voice. We should be able to speak and be heard. So please help us keep this place open. We should not have to move. It is successful and amazing, and I love it here. So please, thank you very much.
Okay, sorry, thank you so much. I had lost internet connection very briefly there. Thank you, Hannah, for those words. Let's go now to Dan McGraw in Shares Housing for Work program. They're in solidarity, of course, with North Lake residents and not being swept, and have been as Share longtime participants in the movement to stop the sweeps and in the People's Budget movement. So Dan, go ahead and take it from here. And then after Dan, we're gonna do a little walkthrough of this North Lake tiny house village so people can get a fuller sense of what community is like here. But first, let's hear from Dan McGraw.
Okay, sorry there. First of all, thank you, Councilperson Sawant, for helping push us through and get these voices heard. And I'm a member of SHARE. My name's Dan McCraw. I'm part of their Housing for Work program. And I wanted to come today. I'm actually visiting North Lake Tiny House Village to show my support. I knew about it beforehand, but today was my first time taking a tour. And I got to tell you, like, I basically got a chill seeing the community. Oh, start the video? Start the video. Shoot, I'm sorry.
Hang on one sec. We're gonna go ahead and get his video.
Okay, it's on. Sorry. We all good? Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say today was my first day actually visiting North Lake Tiny House Village, and you know the chill that I got seeing what can happen when a self-managed community is built. These people have something here special, while meanwhile we know very well that the mass shelters are pits of despair. You know, they're places where COVID ran wild, while this place had no positive tests, while these people maintained in a way that it was hopelessness for the people who were put into hotels temporarily in a way that can't be sustained, and we can't go back to them being put in those mass shelters. You know, one of the things I thought about today as I'm looking at this tiny house village is to paraphrase MLK, you know, when we spend more to militarize the police than we do on programs of social uplift, you know, we're approaching a type of spiritual death. And this right here is the opposite of that. You know, it should be to me, it really should be it shouldn't even be a question that we are going to put our support behind programs like this. And I just want to say, you know, groups like SHARE, we're ready and able to take on the challenge of doing this. I mean, if you look at the news, people are going to, you know, I hate to even think it, but there's going to be mass evictions, and we got to be prepared ahead of time for this. We're talking right now about evicting people who have got it together and are doing what we should be doing. A prime example of how it should be. It boggles the mind. It boggles the heart. I mean, preparing for what's coming in front of us. Obviously, this right here is a prime example, and I'm proud to be a part of. Thank you all for having me here today, and best of luck to everyone here. You're doing what should be done, and I hope the city and the mayor get behind that somehow. If they don't, we'll push them to. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dan. Thank you, and Nitra, for sharing, some of the voices of the community that we really need to be projected in about 30 minutes when the city council is going to begin discussing budget amendments, including amendments that Councilmember Shama Sawan is putting forward to stop the sweeps, and also a proviso, which means that we want to prevent the city of Seattle from spending money to sweep the beautiful North Lake Tiny House Village community. And when we think about the desperate needs of ordinary working people in the city of Seattle, the Black and Brown community in particular, as we've heard, where the defund money can go, but also to things like renters' rights. Dan is correct to talk about the coming, a tsunami of evictions. I've heard from mainstream media, mainstream economists are warning about a tsunami of evictions. And so to be able to come together in this space, to pressure city council to say it is crazy to use precious dollars that could be spent on urgent needs for working people, for ordinary people, for Black and Brown communities, to spend those sweeping the North Lake community is just insane. We've got a few minutes right now to go ahead and take a little bit of a tour of the North Lake community. It can seem kind of abstract, non-concrete. Let's see, Sean Smith, a longtime activist in the Nicholsville community, is going to go ahead and walk us through this North Lake Tiny House Village. So go ahead and take it, Sean.
Wait a minute, I can't see. Wanted to show everybody around this wonderful community we built here. Safe community, COVID community. We have that we're in the midst of a mass sweeping the country. And okay, everybody has been safe and sound, and you can see our social distancing right in the background. It's a shame that people like Jason Johnson say that we're safe, unsafe, unclean, just blatant lies that have no business, in the public comment, or even the city council people. I mean, he lied to city council about the navigation team. He's lying about his statements about Nicholsville. We're only asking to stay in order to be safe. It's not an unreasonable request. That the country is falling apart at the seams. 150,000 deaths across the nation should be a wake-up call for the mayor's office and everybody in the city to realize that moving people around in the time in crisis like this has no business. We fully support the Stop the Sweeps Amendment, sending armed men to traumatize further people who are already traumatized by homelessness is insanity. Let's reach out and do things right. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Scott. And again, just a huge thank you to the whole community here at Northlake for allowing, our people's budget community meeting space in to see the community that we have here in the city of Seattle, and to help us be able to orient to the city council to make sure that every council member hears from as many people as possible on this a day when the city council is set to vote potentially on stop the sweeps legislation, on a proviso to prevent this Northlake from being swept. We really want to make sure that every single council member knows that they need to support the stop the sweeps legislation put forward by Councilmember Sawant and the People's Budget Movement, that they should support the proviso to not sweep Northlake and support the Northlake community. Let's go ahead right now. Shortly, we're going to hear in detail about the defund legislation that Councilmember Shama Sawant is putting forward. But before that, we want to hear about the People's Budget Movement a little bit more in depth. We want to hear from an activist with Socialist Alternative, an activist in the People's Budget Movement, a renter here in Seattle. Bia, if you could take it from here, let's hear another voice of this People's Budget Movement, please.
Hi, thanks, Adam. Yeah, thanks, everyone. This has been really great. Yeah, so as a renter in Seattle and a member of Socialist Alternative, I know that the People's Budget Movement is really necessary to fight for the things that we need as working people in the city and in this country. Even corporate media, I think it's been mentioned already today. We've been talking about a looming threat of an enormous amount of evictions. Corporate media across the US have been forced to recognize and give warning about what they've been calling an eviction apocalypse, a tsunami of evictions in a country where we were already facing an enormous housing crisis, as we all know here in Seattle. And people of color have faced disproportionate job loss during the pandemic and will likely face the brunt of the millions of these predicted evictions in the coming months. This is on top of the vicious racist gentrification that has been pushing Black and Brown communities out of the city for so long. So we stand with the movement calling to defund SPD by 50% in 2020. 50% cut of their remaining operating budget means $85 million redirected from these brutalizing actions and repressing our communities, and instead to invest in things that make our communities thrive. $85 million to go to Black and Brown working class communities and services, which would mean $36 million for affordable housing. And we should use $700,000 of that $85 million for renters' rights, which includes $500,000 for renters organizing at the tenants union and $200,000 for eviction defense lawyers for the thousands of tenants who are facing down rents they cannot pay. Earlier this year, we made a call for the establishment to cancel rent, and they didn't do that. Because of the organizing statewide and across the nation over the past months, the establishment was forced to enact eviction moratoriums. Socialist Alternative and Councilmember Sawant's office, alongside renters' rights organizations, collected over 9,000 signatures for the cancel rent petition. But because rent hasn't been canceled, once the moratoriums are lifted, there will be this tsunami of evictions unless renters get organized, and unless they get organized seriously toward a rent strike. We need money for renters to get organized, not money for police to enforce brutal evictions. Black working class and poor people were disproportionately impacted by the eviction epidemic even before the recession. The private housing market has failed. It is the core of racist gentrification in this city. It has built thousands of luxury apartments that are sitting empty while working families, especially Black and Brown people, are pushed out of the city and even onto the street. We are calling to stop the sweeps of our homeless neighbors, as everyone has talked about today, and we are calling to fund high quality public housing and services. The sweeps are brutal and ineffective. And as has also been mentioned, I think already, the Center for Disease Control said that the sweeps are likely to hasten the spread of COVID-19. As a Socialist Alternative member and renter, I'm organizing with the People's Budget Movement because it's committed to fighting and winning to make a real material difference in the lives of working class people. We launched this movement in the first year Councilmember Sawant was elected, and every year since then, the People's Budget has won significant victories for homeless neighbors, for affordable housing, and for renters' rights. I'm saying that we should do it again this year, as we're all saying here today. And, you know, austerity, business as usual budgets are being proposed all across the country. And when working people are facing the most desperate situation, the most severe economic depression in 150 years, the political establishment is cutting programs. And in Seattle, we can show that another world is possible. It's that belief that another world is possible that drives me to be a fighting socialist. Capitalism is a police state, so let's fight for a socialist world. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Bia, for those words about the People's Budget Movement and the incredible impact that it's had over the years, in fighting for the homeless population, but also, we've won hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in reality for renter organizing, and we're continuing to fight this year. The main demand, however, as we all know, flowing from the uprising around George Floyd's horrific murder and the protests around that, has been the demand from the movement to defund the police departments all across the country. That includes the Seattle Police Department by at least 50%. There is a huge movement around that, as we all know. In reality, today at noon, there's a rally at Rainier Beach Community Center Plaza put on by Black Education Now. I believe we'll be able to share those links in that link in the live stream. The People's Budget Movement and Councilmember Shama Sawant fully supports all of those demands. We've also know that coming up on Monday, when the City Council will be discussing further the defund legislation, there will be a take to the streets, defund the police, march and rally, Monday at noon at the King County Youth Jail. That's right across City Hall around 5th and James. So there is a movement around this. There is, however, at this point in time, just one council member, and that's Shama Sawant, who is concretely putting forward legislation to defund the police to the tune of 50%, $85 million. And a big part of our movement's ability to pressure City Council is knowing the ins and outs of that legislation, but also the political justifications that council members who just a few weeks ago, in their majority, 7 out of 9, 6 other council members, in addition to Councilmember Shama Sawant, have committed to defunding by at least 50%. But now, of course, we're hearing all kinds of justifications and reasonings for why it can't actually happen in full right now, that it needs to wait. Let's hear from Jonathan Rosenblum, community organizer in Shama Sawant's office. He's going to go through a slideshow that demonstrates how we're going to defund the police by 85% and also counters the bogus arguments of the need to delay by council members with arguments from the movement for why we need to defund right now and invest that money in Black and Brown community. So please go ahead, take it, Jonathan.
Good morning, everybody, and it's great to see everybody at Nicholsville, Northlake, especially such a wonderful community. And I'm going to talk for a few minutes about where we're at with the defund. If I could have help from my coworker Nick with the slideshow. We're going to show you, this is a slideshow that we used at the press conference yesterday. Some of you may have already seen this, but our working with the movement, our People's Budget Movement, working with the broader community, is totally committed to defunding SPD. We demand that the remaining 2020 Seattle police budget be cut by 50% and invested in Black and Brown working class communities. And later today, as you heard, Councilmember Sawant, on behalf of the movement, is introducing specific budget amendments to do just that. And we urge other council members to support these amendments. Let's go to the next slide, just for a little background on what we're talking about. With the bloated Seattle Police Department budget is $409 million this year. And just to give you a sense of what that means with respect to the whole city budget, that's 27%, more than 1 out of every $4 of the city's entire discretionary budget goes to the police. That's more than what the city spends on human services, including caring for our elders, caring for people experiencing homelessness, affordable housing, neighborhoods, arts and culture combined. All those things combined don't even add up to what we pay, what the city spends on police services right now. And by the way, it's nearly double what the fire department's budget is. Let's go to the next slide. Here's an example of how the police department budget compares to other things. Much bigger than other needed social services and social programs like parks and recreation, human services, housing, fire department, as I mentioned, education, library. The Seattle police budget far exceeds what we spend, what the city spends in these other program areas. Next slide. And I do want to point out to folks who are watching, this slideshow is available right now online. The last slide of this presentation, I'm going to send you to a URL where you can easily access this. So don't worry if you miss some of the information here. SPD employees constitute only 17% of the city workforce, but 60% of top city salaries. In fact, 119 out of the top 200 paid City of Seattle executives and employees are in the Seattle Police Department. These are mostly officers, sergeants, and lieutenants racking up extraordinary amounts of overtime. They were paid last year an average of $268,000. And a lot of this, of course, is for overtime, tear gassing us, sending blast balls our way, and so on. The overtime that they incur by covering the protests in the streets. Next slide. How much is a 50% defund this year? Well, if the total budget is $409 million, then the budget for 5 months, beginning tomorrow, we have 5 months left in the year, that's 170 million, and half of that 170 million is $85 million. So that's our proposal to defund by $85 million this year. We would put that money into affordable housing, services in Black and brown working class communities, renter organizing and eviction defense, youth programming, and alternatives to repressive policing. I'm going to get into that in a little more detail in just a moment. We also would, of course, defund the SPD by cutting out 100% of the sweeps program that the police are in charge of. Even after we defund by 85 million, the SPD would still have $85 million left, which incidentally is nearly 5 times what the city spends in the entire year for immigrants and refugees, for enforcing labor standards, and for civil rights combined. So the SPD will still be awash in money compared to other departments, even after they are defunded by 50%. Next slide. Just a note about the 50% defund. There's been some talk, I know, in the community that isn't the number going to be higher because the budget is higher than 170 million for the last 5 months of the year. And I just want to note that as we continue to demand accountability from the mayor and SPD to come clean on how much money is actually in the police budget, our demand remains 50% defunding of the SPD. Let's go to the next slide. We're going to achieve the $85 million defunding by doing 2 things. One is we are taking the $16 million that the mayor's already promised to reduce the SPD budget by restricting overtime, limiting training and new equipment purchases. And then we're going to cut an additional $69 million from the budget of the SPD through across the board reductions in patrols and other operations, and by entirely eliminating the sweeps program. So the 16 million already promised by the mayor plus 69 million in additional defunding gets us to $85 million of defunding SPD. Where do we put this money? Let's go to the next slide. These demands, I should say, come out of the community and our people's budget movement. We are going to spend $15.5 million in funding Black and brown restorative justice and other community programs. We would put another $3 million, as the community has demanded, to develop alternative public safety models, $700,000 to help renters who are organizing and fighting eviction, $80,000 to fund the Green New Deal Oversight Board, which was budgeted in 2020, but frozen by the mayor. And this is specifically to help get the oversight board, the community-led oversight board, off the ground. We're going to fund affordable working class housing in communities that have faced displacement and gentrification. That's about $35 million. And then we're going to take the mayor's savings and use it to cover the city budget deficit to make sure that other programs don't get cut. That's 16 million. And then finally, we're going to be moving the 911 call center out of the SPD and into civilian control. That saves another $15 million. That is the amendment that Chama is producing this afternoon, formally introducing before the budget committee. Now I'm going to show you a comprehensive list of all the other 50% defund amendments that are being produced by other council members. Next slide, please. Here they are. Yep, that is a blank page because in fact, no other council member, notwithstanding their rhetoric, they support 50% defund. No other council member has put forward an amendment to defund SPD by 50%. Let's go to the next slide. Now, we're hearing a lot of excuses so far about why we can't defund. And the reason why the previous slide was blank is you can imagine that council members who a couple of weeks ago were saying, yes, we support defund, are now facing a backlash from business and from their political base that they believe they need to respond to, who are saying, oh no, you can't do this. This is going to be too fast. This is going to be too drastic. We're certainly seeing a backlash from the police themselves and from SPOG, which has launched an offensive against our People's Budget program. And what we're beginning to hear inside City Hall is that these cuts are too deep. And we know that our movement is demanding a serious shift in policing. The council members have promised to defund, and we need to hold them accountable. We're also hearing that we have to be, quote unquote, thoughtful, that it will take a while to make these right cuts. And we know that this is just a blatant excuse. After decades of police abuse, especially directed against Black and brown communities, it's time to act. And we remember that when council members wanted to overturn the 2018 Amazon tax, they did it over the course of 2 days in lightning speed. There is no reason for delay. Let's go to the next slide. We're also hearing that some in the establishment are saying we need to get SPOG's approval first for the cuts. And this is absurd, of course. SPOG does not run the city budget. The city council does. What politicians will cut and won't cut is all about political will. And when they want to cut vital services by laying workers off, they don't say it will take time. They say it needs to be done right now. There are 200 Metro bus drivers who were just laid off very rapidly by King County Metro last week. King County Metro didn't say it will take time and we have to take months to do it. They said, we need to cut these jobs now and here's your layoff slip. Now, the final argument we're hearing from a number of people in the establishment is we actually don't know how much SPD has left over for the rest of 2020. It might be less than $170 million because in fact, they may have overspent their overtime budget already covering the protests and tear gassing us. So we know that if SPD has less than 170 million left over, then they're just going to have to make do with less than the 85 million that they would have left over after our amendments get adopted. They shouldn't, for instance, have spent so much money, 6.3 million in overtime, in attacking the Justice for George Floyd protesters in just the first 12 days of those protests. Next slide. We know it's going to take a very powerful movement to win. Let's not underestimate what we are up against. We're up against the mayor, we're up against big business, we're up against SPOG, right? And we're up against the political establishment that may want to say the right thing, but are not going to want to do the right thing by defunding SPD by 50%. But we remember too that we showed in the Amazon tax fight that we can win against the most powerful of adversaries, but it only will happen if we organize and build a powerful fighting movement. Here in Seattle and around the country, young Black and brown activists and young workers are leading the struggle to defund the police and invest in housing, healthcare, education, and programs in communities of color. And today is another step in that fight. Monday as well, next Wednesday, when the Budget Committee votes on our amendment, we have to be building these fights every step of the way. Let's go to the next slide. Just to wrap things up before I turn it back over to Adam and Shama, this presentation is available at this website, tinyurl.com/defundspd-July 31. So again, that's tinyurl.com/defundspd-July 31. And if anybody can't access that, please get in touch with our council office. We would be happy to forward you a copy of this presentation. Any other questions, or is there anything that I've missed, Adam?
Jonathan, I think that you've been very thorough in going through these defund logistics. I know that we are just about 7 minutes out from the city council meeting. So it's not a bad thing. Of course, we've all been we've had a lot of information thrown at us. So to just kind of reiterate some of the basic demands of this people's budget movement. In reality, this is a movement that has been fighting for years for the interest of basic, ordinary working people. So we've had demands to stop the sweeps and eliminate the so-called navigation team. And of course, you all have heard very, very powerful arguments for why that has to occur right now. We've also heard a systematic explanation of the defund the police budget amendments. I believe that Councilmember Shama Sawan is hoping to come in for just a little bit right now with an additional piece of information on our defund amendments in relation to the other council members. So go ahead, Shama, and if you could take it from here for a minute or two.
Thank you, everyone who shared their thoughts and showed that the people's budget indeed is many years worth of effort, and also that came after the work that many of our Seattle-based activists have been doing the work for years. So I thank everyone who's been organizing this year and also in the previous years. I just wanted to quickly share an update with you. As you know, the way my office works is we are an integral part of the movement on the ground. We are not separate from the movement. Our office is the movement's voice in City Hall. And so we share all our information publicly as soon as possible, because our goal is to empower ordinary people, working class people, to community members to fight for social and economic justice in our city by overcoming the opposition of the establishment. So in that spirit, we had made our budget amendments for defunding by at least 50% right this year in 2020, accessible and available to everybody for days. And as I said, yesterday morning, we unveiled more details on where that will go. Jonathan just shared with you all those details. And what we've been hearing from many of the council members, including the ones who have promised publicly that they support 50% defunding, is a lot of the excuses that we can't do this immediately, this has to wait, and why this has to go through approval of the guild, when really public sector unions ordinarily are never consulted, and budget cuts and austerity go on without any consideration to how this will affect both the public sector workers and the unions, but also the marginalized communities who rely on the services provided by the workers. For example, transit, when you cut bus drivers, it affects the drivers themselves and the communities that rely on public transit. So today, finally, we have the amendments from other council members. I'm not surprised entirely, but I'm quite stunned to see that the amendments that they have provided in the name of defunding add up to less than $1 million. And I'm of course going to ask this question to the central staff to make sure I'm counting this correctly. It seems that they are adding up to less than $1 million. Compare that to a defunding of $85 million at least. I mean, it is just complete night and day difference. And also I would mention that when you calculate what percent of these amendments from other council members add up to as a percentage of the police budget, literally they're being measured in hundreds of 1%, not even in the tenths of a percent. So it gives you a sense of how tiny these proposed amendments are. I think we have to be honest, at that level, if you're willing to cut only $1 million, even less than 1 million this year, out of an $170 million budget that they have left over, I don't think you can use the word defunding to describe that. That is simply, because you're feeling pressure from the movement from below, you are willing to cut a little bit here and a little bit there. That's not defunding. The word defunding applies to substantive cuts, something like a 50% cut. So I really hope that the council members are going to support the $85 million defund that our community and people's budget is presenting. But if they don't immediately support, we are going to have to continue getting organized until the final vote is taken this summer before the council goes on break.
All right, thank you so much, Shama. We're just 2 minutes out from the council meeting. Wanted to thank everybody for joining us. And again, a special thanks to the residents at North Lake Tiny House Village for letting us house this community meeting on site here in a really exciting and dynamic community meeting. And we actually are blessed and are lucky to have the opportunity to have the residents themselves send us off in the last 2 minutes with just an individual message from as many of these residents as we have before the 10 o'clock hour comes. And so, yeah, just want to give people the space. And we've got a couple of hard of hearing residents as well. So.
Stop the sweep. Stop the sweep, they endanger lives. Stop the sweep. Let us stay.
Stop the sweep, defund SPD.
Stop the sweep.
Support Nicholsville, I do. Stop the sweep. Viva Nicholsville, stop the sweep.
All right, well, thank you again, everybody. It's 1 minute out. Of course, we did our social distance community meeting here. All right, I can't think of a better send off, so we'll go ahead and put up the splash screen. People should go on the Seattle channel right now and tell City Council, stop the sweeps, defund the SPD, fund renter rights, support the people's budget movement. Thank you so much.